to get back to events, in December '91, I met with Marianne Gallant, who had previously worked as my assistant in the computer lab at Curry. Now she was the director of the program. She graciously, and the college, allowed me to come back as an adjunct instructor and gave me one course to start in January 2000. I received senior lecturer status, which paid about $3,200, which was a generous salary, and I was able to increase my TIAA retirement contributions. In other words, I contributed 6% and Curry contributed 12%, which ended up being 18% of my salary going into adding to my retirement in TIAA, which was pretty significant. Anyway, when Janet returned from the Los Angeles training to Logan, she didn't have the easiest time at the airport. She was particularly upset at being expected to drive and maneuver the ramp to the jet's door. She came to enjoy her job, though, over time. Her commute was taxing. The Red Line, which was right across the street from our apartment, was easy enough, but when she got to South Station, she had to transfer to the Orange Line and then to the Blue Line. She was given a monthly T-Pass from Air Canada, though, which came in very handy, and on the weekends it was good for another passenger. So we utilized that frequently to get into Boston. After a time, and in good weather, she would walk from South Station to the Blue Line, eliminating the Orange Line entirely. I really need to correct an omission. Janet received her BA in psychology from Curry in 1990. She gets some credit for her time at UMass Amherst, but the majority of her studies were at Curry. She is very intelligent with a quick mind, but she hates to write. But she loves to read voraciously. Like me, she doesn't really shine in social situations. We're a great match. I must also admit that both sisters, Janet and Anne, are very patient with their husbands. Life without Janet is impossible to imagine. In March of 2000, we rented a second-floor apartment, which I had just referred to, opposite the D, at 179 Bergen Parkway in Quincy. The location was great, offering easy access to Boston, as well as stores and activities right around Quincy Center. The building was old and the apartment quaint but hardly modernized. Laundry facilities were downstairs, and parking was problematic, as it had no parking of its own. I got about a half-time position working the Adams National Heritage Site in the gift shop as site supervisor with Eastern National, less than a 5-minute walk away. I was the sole person to keep the store stocked and manage finances. I reorganized the office area and put a lot of effort into stocking and setting up the gift shop. Teaching my computer classes at Curry as senior lecturer was a mixed bag. I prepared all new lesson plans for the courses I taught, which included spreadsheets, database, and eventually a course that I created, The Cultural Impact of Information Technology. In June, Jan and I took a 4-day vacation to Ottawa. We had a great time walking around the city, visiting a museum, attending a piano concert, an auto show, touring the governor's residence at Redo Hall, and viewing a nighttime light show projected against the Parliament building. In July, we boarded a tour boat in Boston Harbor to view the tall ships at anchor at the Black Falcon Terminal. They had sailed into the harbor the day before. Supposedly, up to 1.5 million people watched them from the shore in several of the islands in the Boston Harbor. Thinking about jockeying for position in those crowds was enough to keep me away, but the boat ride was a great alternative. Jumping ahead to the year 2001, we took a 13-night Baltic cruise aboard the Norwegian Dream, ending in St. Petersburg, Russia. This was a much anticipated and one of my favorite cruises. At this point, the U.S. had a more friendly relationship with Russia. We thoroughly enjoyed our experience, though there was a sense of suspicion when dealing with individual citizens. This was very early in Putin's reign, and there was no sign of his ultimate intentions. Having said that, we were really impressed by the city, especially the Hermitage and the Summer Palace. A humorous episode occurred when one of the street hawkers wanted to sell us a book of Russian postage stamps. I told him that I didn't want to have to carry them through the Hermitage, but if we saw him at the end of the tour, we'd be interested. Sure enough, when we finished the tour, there he was, and I had to keep my promise. We also made an excursion to Berlin, which was profound and fascinating. You should see the journal for more details of the whole cruise. Then there was September 11th, 2001, now referred to as 9/11, a terrorist attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. On that day, we were watching one of the cable channels. I switched the channel and noticed two buildings on fire. It took a minute or two to figure out that these buildings were the Trade Center towers in New York City. By now, Jan and I were both glued to the TV screen. We didn't see the planes colliding into the buildings. While we watched smoke billowed out of the towers, we heard about the Pentagon being hit by yet another jet. Not long after that, we saw a tremendous explosion. It was not immediately apparent that one of the towers was collapsing. A huge cloud of debris erupted from the ground into the air and outward across the city and the concrete canyons of Manhattan. There were live transmissions showing people running for their lives down the streets. Not long after, the remaining tower crumbled before our eyes. We were stunned. I still can't believe that a single airplane could bring down a whole building. I remember remarking to Jan that if this had occurred in a movie, nobody would believe it was possible. I was not affected the same way that the vast majority of Americans were. I was shocked, obviously, but most Americans seemed to explode into a paroxysm of rage. Certainly the Bush administration reflected and fed that emotion. Much of the rage was channeled into an outpouring of patriotism. Flags sprouted everywhere, all over cars, hung on buildings, bridges, all over the place. After several days, the government began to single out a terrorist, bin Laden and his group. First, they attempted to work with the Afghan government, but quickly changed their tactics and revealed a close relationship between bin Laden and the Taliban, who controlled Afghanistan, which only provided a setting in which to play out their frustrations. This is not to say the Taliban didn't get what they deserved, just that the government's focus was too narrow. At first, I hoped that this might convince the politicians that it was imperative to work for a solution to the Mideast problem. To me, the action indicated how deep and profound the hatred was against America in this part of the world. The actual actions of the government were in an entirely different direction, to do what it does best, make war. This was very popular with the general public. It also unleashed the Israelis on the Palestinians. The net result was a world of even greater tension and heaved even higher in hate than before. The administration stressed that the stage was set for a long struggle, but it was a struggle using the wrong weapons and with too narrowly defined goals. Enough said about that. After Paul Jr. quit the Dow Chemical job, he began working at Genzyme in February 2002. I think it was a great step up as he climbed the technical ladder that was so good to him. He certainly deserves so much credit for his achievements despite not taking traditional degree route. Consider how much he saved by not going that route and how much he earned during those 4 years. In early March, Paul took Jan and me and Jen to help celebrate his 27th birthday at Cantina Italiana. After the meal, we headed back to Quincy. We did have a good discussion about life in general. I was trying to make a point that society was qualitatively different today, much more materialistic than in the past. Paul Jr. contended that it was a matter of people having more choices and the ability to buy things today, but that the human nature was basically the same. Janet supported Paul's view. Alicia seemed at least to understand what I was trying to say, and added that she believed that all this focus on material things was detracting from the love of God. I didn't expand then, but for most of the past, the common person, not the upper crust, lived close to subsistence existence, grateful to make it from one year to the next. Adding to their possessions was not something they really worried about. That changed with the Industrial Revolution and mass production. Accumulating things and increasing wealth is a cultural imperative. I said that ultimately it was really academic anyway. What was important was our individual beliefs. Let society go where it will. We should determine how to live a life that has a meaning for us. I pointed out that most people's experience is relatively limited, especially if they have little interest in the world beyond the immediate experience, needs, and wants. It is valuable to know about other places, times, ideas. It provides a perspective and a context to one's own life. I quit the job at the Park Service in October 2002. I was offended when one of the Park Service managers decided to rearrange the floor space without even consulting me. I walked in one afternoon and they were busy moving inventory around. This was my area of responsibility. It might not have been a big deal to them, but it was part of my job to manage and account for inventory. I also took special pride in the display. I would have accommodated any request they might have had, but they felt no need even to consult me. Perhaps I took offense where none was intended. The sin of pride prevailed in this case. Overall, it was a good experience. I'm sorry that it ended on such a note. After being admitted to the hospital for chest pains, Janet's mom died at the hospital in July 2003, as Anne was sitting by her side. This was a traumatic event for the whole family. Louise was an integral part not only of her immediate family, but also of ours. She and Vic, when he was alive, were intimately involved with the grandchildren, and for the most part, Jen and Paul were very fond of them both. So many holidays and birthdays were spent in Southbridge, and she was always whipping up meals when folks dropped in. After Vic's passing in 1995, she was an honored grandmother who doted on her grandchildren as well as her daughters. She could be generous to a flaw, even in the face of certain bad habits like smoking and neglecting her own health. During 2003, I developed a course for Curry I referred to before, and that I had always wanted to teach, the cultural impact of information technology. I did extensive background research and combined with my academic background, courses in computer science, philosophy, history, and just my general reading preferences. The underlying motivation for this course was to encourage students to ponder certain questions. How does technology influence our lives? Where is it leading us? And do we even want to go there? Do we even have the ability to control technology, or are we simply part of an evolution of technology and artificial intelligence? Ultimately, I may have elevated the thinking of some students. To be honest, most are just too enamored of the latest gadgets and technology and culturally indoctrinated to be concerned. Jan quit her job at Air Canada in July 2003. She was traumatized after 9/11, considering that one of the jets originated from Logan. And Air Canada was having serious financial troubles. Her job was very stressful, and I believe it was really a case of burnout. I had no problem with the decision. Her well-being was more important than any lost income. I had no doubt that she'd find something else eventually anyway. In October 2003, my dad told us that my mom had been taken to St. Vincent's Hospital in Worcester. She had suffered an attack similar to the one she had experienced earlier in the year, pain in her chest and arms. My father said that he looked over at her at 8 o'clock in the evening and she didn't look very good. He asked her what was wrong and she didn't reply. He rushed to her side and kept asking questions, but she wouldn't respond. He called 911 and they took her to the hospital. Later, when he asked her why she didn't respond to him when he was talking to her, she said she didn't want to disturb him, that she could tough it out somehow. She had the operation the following morning. The family assembled in the hospital during the operation. While we were waiting, I was asking my father about when he was young. I asked him if he hung around with his brothers very much, and he said that they had their friends and he had his. As to his brothers closest in age to him, Charlie, he said that he was a cheap son of a gun and he was always borrowing, but wouldn't let anyone near his stuff. At one point, my dad mentioned that Mom absolutely hated to cook, and that was why she rarely invited people to visit. He added that when she was young and they were dating, she loved to sing and dance and wasn't afraid to perform in front of people. She'd sing with her sisters Marion and Doris. I'd never heard her sing in my life, and I don't know what happened. He also spoke of old downtown Worcester. He said that he and his mother would go downtown to the shops and stands on Front Street and begin at one end, checking all the prices. After they walked the whole area, they'd return to the beginning, this time to buy. There were several other areas that he liked to frequent. One place had enormous hot dogs. He said that Worcester had many trolleys then, and like other kids, he'd hop on one for a ride. And when he came near to where he wanted to go, which wasn't a regular stop, he pulled the rod that connected the train to the power line above, cutting the power to the train. It would slow down enough so that he'd jump off and run from the conductor. After many hours, the surgeon who performed the angioplasty came in and summarized what happened. She explained that it had taken them a while to find the obstruction and that they had to use several tools to clear away the scar tissue and some cholesterol blocked area. Because so many blood thinners were used, it was taking longer than usual to get her out of the OR. There is much more to the story, to my mother's ordeal bouncing between hospital, home, and nursing home before she passed on November 29th. The whole story is in my journal. Suffice it to say that I wouldn't wish such a horrendous experience on anyone. Early in 2004, Jan was able to find a job at BMIT, Brian Moore International Travel. After several brief stints at other jobs, she found a job that she really liked. She worked in operations, helping to arrange tours to Ireland. Eventually, she became operations manager. Soon after her hiring, she was making reservations for us to visit Ireland, and we had a great time. Again, details in the journal. At the end of May, Jan was confirmed into the Episcopal faith at Trinity Church in Boston. She wore a cross necklace that we had bought for her from Ireland. Knowing Jen, this was not done on a whim by any means. She was baptized Catholic, but we brought her up in the Unitarian Universalist tradition. It has a very liberal and ecumenical tradition with minimal ritual. The Episcopal faith is much closer to Catholicism. An agnostic myself, I envy those with honest faith, something to support them in times of need. Paul and Alicia hold more fundamentalist Christian beliefs. I suppose that the UU experience left them both open to other traditions, which is fine with us if it works for them. My agnosticism is more positive than negative. I cannot accept that humans represent the pinnacle of consciousness in the universe. My intuition and study leads me to believe that it's more likely that there is a pervasive presence that permeates the whole of the universe, of which we are a manifestation. In the Hindu and Buddhist philosophies, grasping the truth requires that we strip away all that makes us feel unique and tied to this temporary, corporeal existence. What remains is part and parcel of the ultimate reality. It may well be that as human beings, we cannot hope to comprehend the eternal truth. In 2004, Dad was diagnosed with squamous cell carcinoma, an aggressive form. He had surgery and follow-up radiation treatments. As time would prove, the treatment, though very difficult on him, was successful. Also, during the year, Paul and Alicia, after remodeling the Mark Street house kitchen, bought another house in Scituate, one street away from the beach. There was one particular problem with the property, though. When a very high tide occurred during a significant storm at sea, the sea would flood onto their property, a couple of feet high, so that the house had to be raised about 8 feet off the ground. Over the next several years, they would rebuild and enlarge the house into an amazing home, and though there was nothing they could do to eliminate the flooding danger. In 2006, the kids got us involved in a housing lottery in Scituate. We were eligible in part because Paul was a resident there. We were selected as a Chapter 40B, limited income lottery winner, for a condo in a new 35-unit building on Front Street called Harborside. We had to settle for a one-bedroom, number 105, on the north side first floor. We put a down payment of $40,000 on the $151,000 purchase price, which was about 50% of market value. After 9 years, I retired from teaching a few months after reaching 62 in 2009. I didn't like to drive, and the miles added to the commute after our move to Scituate didn't help my anxiety levels. Jan also quit BMIT, mostly because of management change that had made her job more stressful, and there would be a problem commuting back and forth from Scituate. To help fill time after my retirement, I read regularly and voraciously. Also, my growing interest and skill in using acrylic paints resulted in a series of paintings, mostly having to do with the ocean and sailing ships. Though I did paintings of my mother's mother based on a black and white photo of her when she was in her teen years. I painted a picture of my mother for my dad, which he hung in the living room near his lounge chair. In 2009, Jennifer married Patrick Crandall. It was a whirlwind romance, not too different from Janet and me. Jennifer kept us in the dark when it came to dating. For many years, I bet Jan that the first guy that Jen introduced us to would be the one she'd marry. One day she called up to tell us she was coming to see us and added, "Oh, and Patrick will be coming too." Who's Patrick? She and Patrick were married in Lincoln, Mass. On November 28, 2009. Jan and I were delighted with the match, and suddenly we were dreaming about grandchildren. He has a good effect on Jen and vice versa. My dad and Patrick's grandmother were able to attend the wedding, which was something of a bonus. In May of 2010, Jennifer reached a goal she had strived and worked so diligently to achieve. She was awarded her doctorate in education from no less than Harvard University. On the way, she had received her BA from Brandeis, a master's from Berkeley in California, and another from Boston College, and now a doctorate from Harvard. Not only did she have to achieve the requisite academic goals, but she also managed the financial necessities that allowed her to travel this most challenging path. Our whole family, now including the Crandall branch, celebrated this elevated achievement. Janet and I couldn't be more proud of Jennifer. Certainly we applaud her for her tenacity and dedication. We were never in doubt that she had the intelligence and the intellectual ability to achieve any of the goals she set her sights on. And perhaps the most important achievement, we have to add mother of 3 to her extensive resume. The next momentous event was the birth of 2 of our grandchildren, Simon and Benjamin, on November 16th, 2011. Our lovely granddaughter Catherine would be born on April 9th, 2014. Jan and I were intimately involved with Jennifer's family since well before birth of the boys. It took IVF to trigger a pregnancy, but for them, as well as for us, it was well worth the effort. It's amazing to think that just a few decades ago, this revolutionary procedure was not even an option. Jan and I began making regular trips from Scituate to Quincy weeks before the birth. We were driving Jennifer to the hospital for the treatments. Despite the deep anxiety, I made the trips to Boston several times to bring her to the various exams and procedures. For a detailed account of our caregiving and delight at helping Jen and Patrick with the kids, again refer to the journal. They were a constant source of joy and love. I could never have guessed the effect of these births on Jan and me. For all our hang-ups, the boys, and later the special girl, Catherine, have introduced us to a new kind of love that must be unique to grandparents. Because we don't have the pressures and the stresses of employment, and having experienced parenthood already, we were able to jump into our caregiving roles with hearts fully open. It was as though they were our babies. A special bond developed between them and us that was like that of our own children, but also different. For instance, the disciplinary role came under the parents' responsibility and not ours this time. To our minds, it was more important to show them as much love and caring as we could, adding something to the massive love of their parents. Watching them at least twice a week, and often 3 times, we observed them change and develop over time. Babies grow and develop so quickly that sometimes I felt like we were watching in fast frame motion. When we were both with them, we tried to keep them occupied, getting down on the floor to play, and when we took them outside, we were never more than a few feet from them. The boys were happy to see us coming, making us feel loved, special, and appreciated. In some ways, it was like the boys had 4 parents, all devoted to them. A review of the pictures and videos Janet and I took all through these months and years should reveal not only the boys' growth, but our enjoyment of them. They continue to amuse and fascinate us to this day. We love watching them as their personalities and features, obviously this includes little girl, develop and evolve. We're always taking them on walks, holding their hands, and giving them rides in the wagon. There was a large school field just down the road from the house. In addition to the field, there was a tennis court. We let the kids run around in the field, up and down the stands, progressing from one level up to the 5th over time. They loved to jump off the ends where we caught them, and eventually they jumped on their own. Being brothers, they loved to compete. Simon was the more daring of the 2. In the winter, they would run and slide on the ice that covered the tennis court. They graduated to pedaling their 3-wheel bikes and eventually to 2 wheels. One activity we engaged the boys in was puzzles, which they loved. We were amazed at how quickly they could assemble them. After they completed a puzzle, it was part of the ritual to jump on the completed puzzle. Of the 2, Benji was the fastest by a slight margin. He seemed to have an amazing ability to visualize and manipulate the pieces and shapes in his mind. Socially, Simon was the quickest at verbal communication and expressiveness and loved to talk. April 9th, 2011 was another glorious day, not exaggerating. The birth of our family princess, Catherine, a girl, yay. Surprisingly, she was quiet, almost withdrawn, and very much a mummy's girl, and still is. But we grew on her quickly. As I write this, she seems a different person, confident, talkative, quick and clever of mind, a talent for crafts, art, and violin. Jumping ahead to the evening of June 29, 2013, Ann's husband Frank Brown fell ill at home as she was caring for him. He passed away suddenly. It was a total shock to the whole family. He was only 64. This was particularly devastating to Ann, obviously, who was devoted to him. Frank's Thanksgiving meals were events that our families looked forward to with anticipation and growling stomachs, and his Christmas tree decorations were more elaborate and whimsical than those in a retail store. On Friday evening, September 5th, 2014, I woke to see Jan lying on the couch. She said she was feeling awful, vomiting and dealing with the pain, but didn't want to wake me up. We decided to head either to the medical center or to South Shore Hospital. Once we were on the road, we decided that she was feeling so bad we went directly to the South Shore Hospital. I pulled up in the emergency room entrance and Jan walked in the door. Fortunately, it was very slow and she didn't have to wait. They ushered her right into a ward and began treatment. They decided to do a CAT scan. I went with her to radiology and waited outside while they did the scan. It took about half an hour or so. Finally, she was wheeled out and went back to the ER and deposited next to a nurse's station to wait. After a time, an infectious disease doctor, a woman, came to examine her while she was still on the gurney and determined that she must have a bad infection. They began IV drip of general antibiotics. After a time, Jan seemed to recover a little, but didn't look much improved. Apparently, a small kidney stone was creating a blockage that resulted in an E. coli infection, making it into her bloodstream. Later, the kidney specialist was to tell us that had treatment not started when it did, things might have been very much worse. Janet was taken to the operating room, but they didn't try to extract the stone immediately because of the inflammation. During the operation, I spent time with kids in the waiting room. Finally, we were allowed to visit her in recovery, limited to 2 or 3 people at a time. I was there every day, all day. We would talk and read and just be together. There was nowhere else I wanted to be except by her side, providing her with company and what assistance I could render. I was so relieved to see her improve over time. The visits from the kids and Ann helped to improve Jan's spirits a lot. I should also credit Jen for pressing the nursing staff to find her a better room with a window. When we got the all clear to leave the hospital on Thursday the 11th, we had to make a decision as to whether to return to the hospital daily for 10 days of antibiotic infusions or have me administer them at home. We decided on the latter course, which required the Visiting Nurse Association to show me how to administer the injections. Jan had to have a PIC line inserted into her right arm. The daily infusions involved the process of sanitizing the injectors, administering the antibiotic, followed by a heparin injection. A nurse came to the condo to demonstrate and watch me go through the appropriate steps. Around 10 days later, the nurse returned to our condo to pull the PIC line out, and Janet recovered quickly, thank heavens. Paul Jr. and Alicia moved again, this time from Scituate to Pecasset on the Cape, close to Narragansett Bay. We came close to having both Jen and Paul's family living within a few miles of each other, but that was not to be. In September of 2016, Jen and family moved into a house in Scituate at 55 Jackson Street. This was a happy day for us, since now they lived only about a mile away and we would be able to see them even more. It also allowed us to attend many activities involving the kids. We've been to soccer games, baseball games, watched them during annual swimming lessons, and occasionally at the beach. We took Catherine to swimming lessons at the Situate Inn pool, just about a 5-minute walk from where we live. I made several videos of her as she learned to swim. We often picked Catherine up from school and watched her at our condo while both Jen and Patrick were working. During the awful COVID period, we were initially confined to our homes, then allowed some degree of interaction, but wearing masks. We haven't yet escaped the virus entirely, turning out to be something like dealing with the flu. I can't recall how many boosters we've had, and just recently, in 2025, Jan came down with COVID after a cruise. I've had it once. A lot of people have had it several times. Focusing on the kids a little, Simon was much more sports-oriented than Benji. Benji being the more academic of the two. He loves to read, pore over books, stories, history, the animal world, and all things related to Dungeons and Dragons. Simon loves sports programs and personalities, Minecraft videos on YouTube. Also, they both loved Legos since they were babies and could build any kind of kit at most in a matter of hours, regardless of the suggested age or the number of pieces. Like or because of their dad's influence, they also love video gaming and Pokemon. Simon loves Minecraft Bed Wars, Benji not so much. During Nono and Nana days, we also play a lot of Yahtzee or Quicks with them, which used to be every couple of weeks, though as I write this in 2025, their visits are less frequent because they have reached their teens and have different activities and priorities. During Nono and Nana days, they would spend 5 to 6 hours with us, during which they pretty much had free rein to do what they'd like, though we did put limits on video time. Catherine liked to bring stuffed animals on those visits and help her Nana with recipes on occasion. She also insists on helping me make Nano sandwiches for lunch using the whole grain bread that I make about 3 times a week. They usually contain tomato, cucumber, lettuce, and especially hummus, which she not only puts on the sandwich, but on the side of her plate for both carrot slices and bread crust that are on the side. Over time, she added provolone cheese to her sandwiches. Initially, she used a stool to help with making the sandwich, but it didn't take long before she didn't need one. Of the three, Catherine probably gets bored with activities more often, would even quit watching one of her programs if some other activity came to mind. One thing that doesn't bore her is her violin. She began playing about age 7 and seems to really enjoy it and takes it very seriously. She's very proud, rightly so, of her ability and talent. Not having a second bedroom, we aren't able to have sleepovers, though the boys, when they were younger, had slept in our bedroom on the floor. Speaking of sleeping, when Catherine was at the age of taking naps, after we picked her up from school, she would insist that her Nana rest with her. Often she would be talking away to her Nana when she would suddenly fall asleep in the middle of a sentence. That was funny. I phoned my father about once every 10 to 14 days. We'd usually talk from about 50 to 60 minutes. For years, I would try to see him once every 4 to 6 weeks, overcoming my anxiety about driving the 70 or so miles to our family home on Rose Lane in Worcester. Occasionally, Jan would accompany me, and I always made it a point to take him out for a meal. My sister Diane kept close tabs on Dad and with her husband Bill. They would take him out for meals or during holidays to visit Bill's family. I carry a good deal of guilt about not doing more for and with him. I generally enjoyed his company, but just couldn't overcome my hang-ups and anxieties about driving. Had we lived closer to him, I've no doubt that he would have been much more a part of our lives. I do harbor a grudge with Dee for not bringing Dad to Situate to see his family here. She really came to events, even when invited, but she would take him to their place on the Cape. Dad died on April 22nd, 2017, at the age of 93, at home sometime during the night. I created a video which honored his life that was played during the wake prior to the funeral service. His burial in the cemetery was accompanied by an honor guard for his naval service during World War II. Unfortunately, the will he left, created well before my mother died, resulted in bad feelings between Diane, Barbara, and me. Diane was appointed executor. As it turned out, the bulk of his possessions, including the home we grew up in, several acres of vacant land in Shrewsbury, and about half the remainder of his financial estate went to my sister Diane. I helped Dee by poring over the massive documents and assisting in liquidating his coin collection. I even found a $10,000 life insurance policy that they hadn't been aware of. A portion of my modest inheritance, about $54,000, was spent taking our kids and grandchildren on a week-long cruise to Bermuda in July 2019 on the NCL Gem, which everyone really enjoyed. We paid all expenses, including drink packages. I only wish we were in a financial position to do even more for them. After all, I'd rather put a smile on their faces while I can still see them. Got some great pictures from that cruise, though. The kids loved going to their ship-sponsored groups and even put a show on at the end of the cruise. There's a video of that. A problem, though, was the makeup that Catherine had to use during the skit. It caused her some problems later. The weather in Bermuda was beautiful, and everyone had a great time at the beach. The coral and colorful fish were different from our home beaches, and the kids were fascinated and excited. In July of 2020, I had several moles removed, one of which, above my right wrist, was a melanoma. Treatment of that one required a re-excision. As it turned out, that would have been unnecessary, which left about an 8-inch scar. This is another medical misadventure that is covered more completely in the journal. Big jump to December 2023. Paul Jr. and Alicia were now living in Boston in one of the new Fan Pier high-rise apartments. For the first time since before they were married, they didn't own a boat. The area they lived in was a project a long time in the making. For years, it was a giant parking lot. It was transformed into a lovely section of the city that hosts many outdoor activities. Paul and Alicia loved to walk around the area and take advantage of the many fine restaurants. Paul has been working on obtaining an Italian citizenship for the past several years. He's hired people to assist him in this endeavor, and his petition was heard by an Italian judge in 2025. They've also bought a house in Nardo, Italy, a unit that had to be extensively modernized to bring it up to code. They hired a management company to watch over it. Paul says that he can pretty much make himself understood in Italian now, though he still doesn't feel comfortable in conversational situations. But that's improving because he's continuing to take tutorial lessons in Italian. Jan and I are both very proud of his accomplishments and determination. He has broadened his perspective and interest in so many areas over the years. Here again, I have to express my regret for not devoting more time and involvement with both Paul and Jen, especially when they were adolescents. My depression and anxiety were at their peak at this time, despite the meds and counseling I was receiving, and I was far too consumed with my job. As a family, we did have many wonderful times and managed to travel and even camp at some interesting and fun locations, like Aspen, Colorado, Mount Desert Island, Maine, Lake George, Wells Beach and Drake's Island in Maine, Williamsburg and Yorktown, Virginia, Washington, D.C. with my sister Barbara's family, Attitash Mountain, Quebec, Canada, Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Prince Edward Island to pay homage to Anne of Green Gables. I think the kids had the biggest problem when Jan and I decided to move to Florida, where we spent 5 years. By that time, Jen was away at college, and Paul had a full-time job at Yankee Controller. In retrospect, though, I would not have made that move, I don't think. On the flip side, Jan and I did have some wonderful times during our years in Florida. The kids visited us occasionally, as did Louise and Vic. When we were in Florida, we took many trips to Disney World and just loved to walk around, especially at Epcot Center. I know it sounds kind of silly, but we really enjoyed it. And we enjoyed especially being in Orlando. After about a year, we moved to Tampa. And for a short time, we enjoyed being there, going to Busch Gardens, for example, and being close to St. Petersburg and the beaches in that area. Both Jen and Paul have blossomed in their own ways as adults. They give us no reason to be concerned with the direction of their lives. It is hard, though, to wrap my mind around the fact that Jen is 52 and Paul 50 as I write this. I felt old when I was 50, and now our kids are. They're less than a decade away from their 60s. In July of 2022, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. We were treated to a meal at Mia Ragazza restaurant in Marshfield, Mass. Paul Jr. and Alicia, Ann, Barbara, and husband Nyron, and Jen's crew helped us celebrate the occasion. Our 25th anniversary involved just the two of us at Disney World Orlando. We were living in Tampa at the time, and it would be another 4 years before we moved back to Massachusetts. We spent several nights at the Grand Floridian, the premier hotel in the park, and we really enjoyed that time. But Grand Floridian was our favorite place at Disney World. They had a band on the second level that we loved to listen to from the lobby, and they had wonderful seats there, and the music was just great. This 50th anniversary was different in so many ways. We were back home and surrounded by family and our beloved children and grandchildren. This was so much more special, a milestone with extra special meaning. The time between our 25th and 50th seemed to have flashed by, really. I read a brief speech, very short, but I knew Janet would not appreciate too much gushing sentiment. As it was, she was embarrassed, but I had to say something heartfelt to note this rare milestone. The meal was great. I passed around commemorative buttons that I had designed and had printed or manufactured. While I show my age, Janet seems ever the beauty that I met and married all those years ago. Jan and I continue to take annual cruises. In 2024, we reached our 50th cruise. The previous year, we took a couple of cruises, the most notable in May when we took a transatlantic cruise from Bayonne, New Jersey to Southampton, England, and the Royal Caribbean Anthem of the Seas. Then from Amsterdam for our Norway cruise and the New Amsterdam, Holland America Line. For the most part, the weather was fairly cooperative as we cruised the fjords and the small towns. We crossed the Arctic Circle to the North Cape area, where we took a wonderful private tour with the Blue Puffin tour operator. The fjords were a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and the ports we visited were lovely. Both ships were fairly new, and we thoroughly enjoyed our time on them. While we really did enjoy the experience, we both feel that the logistics are getting to be too stressful. We had to overnight in Southampton on this particular cruise, fly to the Amsterdam for another overnight. At this point, we almost decided to return home when Janet fell ill, but it was short-lived illness, and she was feeling better by the time we were to board the New Amsterdam. We're both feeling our age, though we are pretty good shape for the mid-70s. We're not as adventurous and much more averse to stress and the complications that always accompany new experiences. We tend to stay pretty close to home with occasional visits to the senior center, particularly the once-a-month Art for Your Mind lectures. And of course, events focused on the grandkids. Recently, we attended a video of a play that Benji had appeared in and attended a violin recital that included Catherine. We try to get to Simon soccer games when the weather is okay and the game is in town. The boys are adolescents now, and we totally understand this phase of their life. Well, not really. All three still seem to enjoy their days with us. Catherine keeps us on our toes with together activities like making nono sandwiches, playing games, and occasionally bringing her violin to play us some new tune she learned. She graduated to a larger violin with a richer sound about a year ago. Catherine's school, Wampatuck, had a special Veterans Day lunch where students with parents or relatives who were currently serving or were veterans could bring them to spend lunchtime with the kids. I attended and had lunch with Catherine and her friends, sitting with her and her fellow students. Catherine seemed very pleased to have me there, and I had a wonderful time eating and talking with the kids. They were respectful and surprisingly talkative. I had mentioned to Catherine that my job in the Navy was to decode radio transmissions from Russian submarines. We spied on them just like they spied on us. So when she was introducing me, she proudly announced that I was a spy for the Navy. That was funny. 14 July 24. Hard to believe, but Benji has grown taller than Janet and myself. Simon is about an inch shorter than his brother, but will likely have his own growth spurt, I'm sure. It is so strange to recall that we used to hold them with one arm, especially Simon. Be sure to see the newborn pictures. Jen and Patrick keep them all pretty busy, and Jen is the organizer. Benji attended Dungeons and Dragons camp, Simon had a course in welding, and Catherine went to music camp. They also do swimming at the Knights of Columbus pool or at the beach. Jen recently got a full-time job as early literacy practice specialist for the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care, mostly working from home but with frequent travels outside of the state. Patrick is still with CVS and seems to be doing well and relatively happy with his job, and he works from home. November 24. Catherine is also becoming quite the little actress, taking parts in a couple of small local plays. She gets more lovely as time goes by. Simon expresses interest in building his own gaming computer. Whenever he can wheedle some time, he plays Minecraft Bed Wars on the computer. Benji is as book-oriented as ever. He is definitely the academic and is still very much into Dungeons and Dragons world. Jen says that he's taken an interest in physical fitness, lifting weights. In November of 2024, we attended a concert that Catherine was part of. Again, there were some photos taken by the staff photographer that were magnificent. They were beautiful. Catherine looked so poised and focused. She is really serious about her music. If she keeps this up, and there isn't any sign that she has lost her enthusiasm, quite the contrary. Concert violinist material for sure? The presidential election resulted in Trump victory despite the fact that he's a convicted felon and seems impervious to the legal system. More on politics later. I just don't want to get into it at this point. I'm trying to avoid a loaded topic that has led us into troubled waters, the likes of which we haven't experienced since the birth of our republic. Jen and I have been able to take frequent walks on what we call our Tree Street route. We walk up Otis, down Hazel, and several connected tree-named streets, then back down to our condo on Front Street. There's a fairly steep uphill component when we begin the walk, which is something that I like for its cardio exercise. I completed more paintings, one with a Little Mermaid focus, which I gave to Catherine, which I'm kind of proud of, but did a pretty good job on that one. I continue to follow developments with the space program, especially SpaceX, but I'm not a big fan of its founder, Elon Musk, a big Trump supporter, and is said to be a terrible employer, very demanding, with little empathy. The recent Flight Test 5 of the Starship was spectacular, with the booster actually being caught mid-air as it was guided back to the launch tower in Boca Chica, Texas. I was sure that the attempt would fail. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. It was also amazing when the Falcon 9, the mainstay of SpaceX space program, began landing on the barges, or sometimes they would even come back to the launch zone and land at a pad there. I mean, we used to watch those landings, well, watch the launches, just to be able to see those landings. It was just amazing. Our expectation from youth was that retirement would be a golden age. No work requirement, time to travel, engage in hobbies, spend time with family. Speaking only for myself, though, Jan is mostly in agreement. We are often plagued by feelings of insecurity, frustration, anxiety, especially in my case. Despite taking over 50 cruises, which have given us enormous pleasure, day-to-day life is actually something of a challenge. Battling boredom can be a real challenge. We have found a new hobby, jigsaw puzzles, usually around 1,000 pieces, though we did one with 1,500, and we've mounted several of them that we really liked. But usually we take the puzzle, break it back up, and bring it to the library, where we can pick up puzzles there for about $2 each, as opposed to spending $20, $30 on a puzzle if you buy it through Amazon, for example. A typical day usually involves playing games, doing puzzles together, and watching too much video, though Janet is usually working on her computer while the TV is on. But she seems to have a unique ability to listen to the television and still do her computer work, computer games, or whatever she's doing. We really don't take part in any regular social activities and have few friends to speak of. Thank heavens we have Jen and the kids close by, and we revel in watching them grow and mature. Each of them are unique and have their own strengths and specific interests. Catherine is very active with her violin, as mentioned several times before, and her creativity and love of crafts is something. She's always working on something. She also journalizes. Maybe there's a little bit of a similarity to her Nono. I mentioned the boys' interests earlier. They had them over for Christmas Eve last year. Jan made lasagna for both holidays, as well as chocolate pie for Thanksgiving. Benji and I made pizzelles for Christmas meal. He loves to cook, especially cake, and it was fun to watch him tackle the pizzelle recipe, but no problem. There's one problem I've had to contend with during the holidays, though. I've been having issues with wheezing and coughing after spending time at their house. After the parties, I came home to experience very tight chests, labored breathing, and wheezing. In both cases, I had to take extra dosages of Klonopin to ease the tension, to just relax. My first trip in an ambulance happened one evening after thoroughly cleaning the vacuum cleaner one morning at the beginning of this year, 2025. Though I was never affected by dust before, this time, by the afternoon, the pressure I felt in my chest got progressively worse. When I went to bed, after taking 2 Klonopin pills to keep me calm in case this was a panic attack, I sat up in bed and tried to stay calm, hoping that this would pass in time, which it had done previously, but it kept getting harder and harder to breathe. Jan was coming to bed around 9:30 and saw my predicament. I thought we should just wait for this to pass. Finally, though, by around 11:30, we decided that I couldn't continue like this, and we called 911. Within just a few minutes, an ambulance was on site and put me on a stretcher. In the ambulance, my blood pressure was elevated, and my pulse was rapid. I was admitted to South Shore Hospital and placed in a room. I was fortunate. There were several people in the area around me who were just lying on stretchers in the hallways. Medications were administered, and I was given an oxygen mask. It took up till about 5:30 in the morning before I was cleared to go home. Jen called Jennifer, who was quick to come to our aid. No problem since, at least as I wrote this. Okay, leaving that issue behind, Paul and Alicia really wanted us to visit their place in Nardo, Italy, and then for a few days in Rome at the end. They organized our whole family, Jen's 5, Jan, myself, and even Anne, for a total of 10 people, for a 10-day trip. They chipped in by contributing in for the Economy Plus seating on Delta and told us that when the trip was over, we could contribute only what we felt we could comfortably afford. Jan and I paid for a limo to and from Logan Airport for us and the Crandalls. It was about $475. In total, we spent about $4,500, and Paul actually had paid an additional $1,000 on our behalf. And just tried to express our appreciation not only for helping us with the finances, but for the amount of work that he and Alicia put in organizing and the tours and, well, the whole trip in general. Jan and I had actually decided no more transatlantic flights. Too long and too much stress, but we decided this was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up and decided to bite the bullet. So in mid-April, we headed to Rome with a 7.5-hour flight and another short flight south. Finally, we arrived in Nardo and saw their unit on the second and third floors for the first time. It's not a large place, but quaint and comfortable. Paul said they had hired an interior decorator to set up the unit. I was particularly intrigued by the kitchen table. The top level of the unit provided an open and extensive view of the area. Picturesque view and very comfortable and open. It even had a bathroom. We enjoyed spending time here, especially the kids. Paul had additional plans for the roof area. The Crandalls had a unit fairly close to them, and Jan, Ann, and I had a large and comfortable rental near a lovely church. We loved our place on an open plaza and close by some great little coffee houses and restaurants. Over the course of the next several days, Paul and Alicia brought us to several of the local touristy spots, though what we really appreciated was the time we spent in Nardo. The high points during the whole of the trip were the times we spent together, especially during meals and at their condo. It was so much fun watching and interacting with the grandkids. They had a ball and made memories that will stay with us and hopefully them forever. Paul and Alicia were perfect hosts and were really appreciated for their efforts to accommodate our wishes and desires. After the trip, when everyone was polled, folks would have liked to have spent more time in Nardo. But I know the kids loved their experiences in Rome, and it would have been irresponsible not to show them some of the ancient and sublimely beautiful city. One of the high points of their time in Rome was a tour through the Colosseum. Benji and Simon really wanted to throw a few punches at each other where gladiators fought millenniums ago. Jan, Ann, and I preferred to stroll around the Vatican area. Another literal high point was the train ride that took us north across the Apennines to Rome. The scenery was beautiful and surprising. There was a new parallel set of tracks being laid alongside the one we were on for part of the route. At one point, we were actually able to see part of the Gargano Peninsula in an area where my paternal and maternal grandparents were born, like Martinata and Monte San Angelo. Everyone got along so well, and there was virtually no friction among our little group. Well, not so little, actually. The flight home was longer, over 9 hours, and confirmed Jen and my decision to avoid long flights and airports in the future. All in all, though, we were very glad we made the trip, and there are a few memories we will treasure more than that adventure. Jen and I had almost decided that we had sailed our last cruise, but we found ourselves on the Holland America Zuiderdam, sailing out of Boston on a New England to Canada cruise, 14 days in September. The weather was almost perfect, with only an afternoon shower in Quebec that didn't affect us much since we had all done all our touring during the first part of the day. We took full advantage of the musical offerings on board, including Billboard on board, the piano soloist who interacted with the audience with wit and information as well as a great ability on that piano. We were daily attendees of the classical duo, a pianist and a violinist. When planning a cruise, we always check out the venues with outside views. On Holland America, we loved the crow's nest over the bridge, and on this cruise, we spent a lot of time there playing games, doing puzzles, and just watching the ocean out the windows. Our cruising strategy is now to begin and end in Boston and take Ubers to and from the port. We really don't want to have to deal with airports or airplanes anymore. That's not to say it might not happen, but we really don't want to have to deal with that in the future. We've been on some 51 cruises now and have visited cities on 3 continents. Some of our destinations, in no particular order, include Rome, Paris, London, Havana, St. Petersburg, the Baltic ports, Berlin, Dublin, Belfast, Quebec, Hawaii, Mykonos, Santorini, Naples, Vancouver, Olympia, Greece, Norway, to the North Cape, and the Caribbean islands, and other destinations as well. I'm seriously thinking about taking the car off the road next year. My auto anxiety is ramping up incrementally as I feel my reaction time and situational awareness on the road degrading over time. It's a very difficult decision. What will we do about getting around the area or making appointments? Will local transport options like Gatra, a locally sponsored shuttle, and Uber work? To my dad, taking the license away from him was about the worst thing he could imagine and feared. Even our neighbors, who are in their mid-80s, seem always to be on the go and still make long road trips to the Cape or Connecticut to see relatives, though they are limiting trips any further than that, and now they're even restricting themselves more. The thing is, having been a passenger in their car on occasion, John's reaction time and ability to maneuver in parking is worrying. I don't want to be the cause of an accident myself or be hit by another driver, as occurred a couple of months ago for the first time since we bought the car in 2007. I had to stop suddenly on the way to Paul and Alicia's new apartment in Weymouth when some guy decided to cross the street in the middle of the road. I stopped in time, but the guy behind me rear-ended me. Caused only minimal damage, really hardly noticeable, but it didn't help my road anxiety a bit.